we are going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons.
We're going to keep on trying to strengthen the American family, said President George H.W. Bush in 1992, to make American families a lot more like the Waltons and a lot less like the Simpsons. It sounded like a harmless line, a politician invoking nostalgia, but to the writers inside Fox Studios, it landed like a punch. For years, they'd been told their yellow-skinned misfits were just a cartoon. Suddenly, the President of the United States was using them as shorthand for everything wrong with America. And deep inside Fox's own offices, a different battle was brewing. In 1997, the network's Standards and Practices Department sent a 3-page memo about a Simpsons episode it refused to air. The entire subject and content, the memo said flatly, is unacceptable for broadcast. This wasn't about a cheap gag or a missed joke. It was about a story the network believed no cartoon had the right to tell. A topic too human, too real, too uncomfortable. Yet the writers refused to let it die. They finished the episode anyway, knowing it could end their careers. That defiance would go on to win awards and rewrite television history. But to understand why Fox tried to bury it, you have to go back to the beginning, to a time when a cartoon about a working-class family felt like a revolution. Because before it became a cultural institution, before it predicted presidents and pandemics, The Simpsons was a provocation, one that forced America to look at itself and didn't always like what it saw. When The Simpsons premiered in December 1989, television was a neighborhood of smiles. Sitcom families hugged at the end of every episode. Kids learned lessons in 22 minutes. Then the screen flashed yellow. A lazy dad, a sarcastic son, a worried mother, a genius daughter, and a baby who never spoke marched into prime time and broke every rule. Bart Simpson didn't respect authority. He mocked it. Homer wasn't the provider. He was the problem. And that was precisely why viewers couldn't look away. By 1990, schools across America were banning Bart t-shirts that read, "Underachiever and proud of it, man." Principals called him a bad influence. Parents called him an embarrassment. But every ban turned into free advertising. The more authority pushed back, the louder kids laughed. Even the White House joined in. When First Lady Barbara Bush called the show the dumbest thing I've ever seen, the writers didn't apologize. They replied on air. A later episode had Bart snap back, "Hey, we're just like the Waltons. We're praying for an end to the Depression, too." It was fast, funny, and brutal. A 7-second rebuttal that made the President of the United States the butt of a cartoon joke. What the Bushes didn't realize was that their condemnation was fuel. By criticizing The Simpsons as un-American, they made it a symbol of American honesty. Creator Matt Groening would later say, "If something looked too perfect, too clean, too fake, we had to poke it." The Simpsons wasn't about idolizing the American dream. It was about showing how hard it was to live it. And as America laughed, Fox realized it was hosting a cultural earthquake that no one could control. Behind the scenes, Fox's Standards and Practices team watched every episode like hall monitors with red pens. Usually they asked for minor changes, a softer word here, a different line there, but sometimes the writers went too far and knew it. In 1992, A Streetcar Named Marge aired with a song mocking New Orleans as home of pirates, drunks, and trollops. The city erupted. The next episode opened with Bart writing, "I will not defame New Orleans," on the chalkboard, a one-line apology that proved the show understood the fine line between satire and slap. By then, the pattern was clear. Wherever The Simpsons went, trouble followed. They mocked Washington corruption, foreign tourism, even their own network.
Us here were born in America. We take this country for granted, but not immigrants like Apu.
Each controversy was a stress test for Fox's tolerance. How far could you push before corporate fear overtook creative freedom? For years, Fox let them walk that edge, until one script in 1997 finally made the network blink. The episode was called Homer's Phobia. On the surface, it looked like any other Simpsons story. A new friend arrives in Springfield. Homer misunderstands everything. Chaos follows. But this one was different. The friend's name was John, voiced by legendary underground filmmaker John Waters, a man whose very presence radiated camp, irony, and unapologetic queerness. In the sanitized world of 1990s television, that was enough to make executives nervous. The first table read went off without a hitch. The cast laughed, the writers smiled, and Waters delivered each line with dry perfection. But when the script hit the desks of Fox's Standards and Practices Department, the reaction was instant panic. 3 full pages of typed objections came back. Not suggestions, not notes, but an outright rejection. Every mention of the word gay was flagged. Every affectionate joke, every nuanced line, every scene that hinted at acceptance was underlined in red. The memo ended with a sentence that landed like a hammer. The entire subject and content of this episode is unacceptable for air. This wasn't an edit, it was an erasure. Fox's memo didn't just reject the jokes, it rejected the very idea of visibility. In the mid-90s, gay characters existed mostly as punchlines or side mentions. Homer's Phobia was asking for something radical, to tell a story about ignorance and empathy through laughter. Showrunners Bill Oakley and Josh Weinstein refused to fold. They knew this episode mattered. It wasn't about mocking gay people, it was about mocking Homer's fear. In the story, Homer meets John and adores him at first, thrilled that someone finally appreciates his kitschy sense of humor. But once he learns John is gay, paranoia takes over. He worries Bart might be influenced, drags him to a steel mill to teach him to be a man, only to discover the factory is run entirely by gay men in hard hats and roller skates. The absurdity was the point. Homer wasn't the villain, ignorance was. But Fox wasn't laughing. Executives quietly urged the writers to replace John Waters' voice with someone else, to rewrite the character as a generic friend. Oakley and Weinstein ignored them. They pushed the script through, frame by frame, knowing it might never air. Their gamble was simple. Maybe leadership would change before production finished. Miraculously, it did. Months later, a new censor arrived. Younger, less afraid, and far more open-minded. When the completed animation crossed their desk, they didn't see a scandal. They saw brilliance. The episode was cleared for broadcast. When Homer's Phobia finally aired in February 1997, the response was electric. Audiences laughed and learned. Critics called it groundbreaking. John Waters himself said, "It's the first time I've been in a show where the gay character doesn't die, doesn't cry, and doesn't apologize." The episode went on to win an Emmy Award and a GLAAD Media Award, setting a precedent for how television could talk about identity without preaching or pandering. In hindsight, Homer's Phobia marked a cultural turning point. It proved that satire could be compassionate, that comedy could dismantle prejudice one laugh at a time. Fox had tried to bury the story out of fear. Instead, it became one of The Simpsons' proudest moments. A reminder that courage in storytelling doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it simply airs on a Sunday night and makes millions of people laugh at their own reflection. 4 years later, The Simpsons faced another kind of silence, one born not of controversy, but of tragedy. The City of New York vs. Homer Simpson opened Season 9 with a cheerful premise. Homer must retrieve his car, booted between the Twin Towers. It was pure slapstick, the kind of absurd adventure that defined the show's golden era. Viewers laughed as Homer groused about the long elevator rides, the overpriced food, the chaos of the city that never slept. Nobody thought twice about the setting. It was just New York, loud and alive. Then came September 11th, 2001. The world stopped. Nearly 3,000 people died in an act of terror that scarred the planet. Suddenly, the Twin Towers were no longer part of a skyline. They were symbols of loss. Overnight, the City of New York versus Homer Simpson became unwatchable. Fox pulled the episode from syndication immediately. No argument, no press release. It was as if it had never existed. Inside the Simpsons office, the mood was heavy. Showrunner Al Jean later said, "The jokes that once made people laugh would now only cause pain." The decision to remove it wasn't censorship, it was compassion. The crew understood that humor had limits, especially when reality had become darker than any punchline. For 5 years, the episode remained buried. When it returned to television in 2006, it was carefully edited. The Twin Towers were cropped out, dialogue trimmed. But the internet, ever watchful, noticed something eerie. A still frame showed a brochure reading New York $9, the Twin Towers beside it forming what looked like 9/11. Conspiracy theories spread instantly. Fans claimed The Simpsons had predicted the attacks. Writers insisted it was coincidence, a cheap ticket joke turned accidental prophecy. But the image became legend. In the years that followed, the event reshaped how television treated tragedy. The era of unfiltered satire ended. Fear of offense replaced freedom of expression. Every joke had to pass through trauma's shadow. Episodes like Day of the Jackanapes, where Sideshow Bob hypnotizes Bart into a suicide bomber, were pulled from the UK lineup. In America, networks hesitated to air anything that even hinted at terrorism, violence, or grief. Even small moments came under scrutiny. When a later episode showed a character flipping the middle finger or holding a bong, Fox slapped it with a TVMA rating. It wasn't about the scene itself, it was about timing. After 9/11, anything irreverent felt dangerous. The Simpsons had always been fearless in its mockery of fear itself. But now, for the first time, it had to make peace with sensitivity. The laughter that once united people was suddenly treated like a risk. In hindsight, the post-9/11 years marked a quiet transformation. The Simpsons didn't lose its voice. It learned to lower it. Satire survived, but the world it once mocked had changed beyond recognition. In one sense, the episode's removal wasn't just about grief. It was about the loss of innocence, both for America and for its most famous cartoon family. While Fox's censors focused on American sensitivities, The Simpsons was igniting culture wars around the world. Every time the family boarded a plane to another country, a diplomatic storm followed close behind. It began in 1995 with Bart versus Australia. What started as a harmless prank call, Bart phoning a boy down under to ask if their toilets really flushed backward, spiraled into political outrage. Australian newspapers accused the show of mocking the nation. Parliament members condemned it on record. But the irony was delicious. Australians themselves loved it. Bart's chaos captured their national humor. Kids quoted his lines. What was meant as satire became a cult badge of honor. Japan didn't share that tolerance. In 1999's 30 Minutes Over Tokyo, The Simpsons vacation in Japan and end up on a surreal game show. Homer wrestles a sumo champion, crashes into the emperor, and throws him, literally, into a dumpster. That single gag crossed a sacred line. Japan banned the episode entirely. No broadcast, no DVD. It became a ghost story. The episode that never aired. Even nearby broadcasters in China, South Korea, and Hong Kong avoided showing it, fearful of offending Japan's royal dignity. Then came Brazil. In 2002's Blame It on Lisa, the family travels to Rio de Janeiro, where the city is depicted as a playground for crime, rats, and kidnappings. The Brazilian Tourism Board was furious. They threatened to sue Fox for defamation. The country's president at the time, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, said the show distorted the image of Brazil. Executive producer James L. Brooks had to issue a public apology, rare for a show built on irreverence. Yet even that apology couldn't stop the ban. The episode was pulled from air for 10 years and heavily edited when it finally returned in 2012. China's retaliation came not through words, but through law. In 2005's Goo Goo Gai Pan, Selma travels to China to adopt a baby, leading to jokes about communism, Mao Zedong, and Tiananmen Square. One sign reads, "On this site in 1989, nothing happened." Another calls Mao a little angel who killed 50 million people. Beijing didn't find it funny. A year later, China banned all foreign cartoons during prime time, a move many insiders linked directly to The Simpsons' mockery. Even decades later, the tension continued. In 2021, Disney Plus launched in Hong Kong without Goo Goo Gai Pan. 2 years later, another episode, One Angry Lisa, was quietly removed from the platform after a scene mocked Chinese labor camps and smartphone factories. No announcement, no statement, just gone. Elsewhere, other countries drew their own red lines. Germany pulled the episode Cape Fear for a sight gag showing Sideshow Bob in a Nazi uniform. Italian networks banned a Halloween special where Homer ate his own flesh, calling it unsuitable for civilized viewers. New Zealand delayed an episode parodying a church massacre, while the Czech Republic refused to air one involving Maggie as a mafia boss during a baptism scene. Each government had its threshold, each culture its own taboos. But The Simpsons didn't change. It kept holding up the mirror, and sometimes the reflection was too sharp to bear. By the 2000s, the show wasn't just an American export, it was global commentary wrapped in yellow skin. Every ban, every protest, every diplomatic apology proved the same point. Comedy is cultural power, and The Simpsons, more than any other show, had become the most powerful cartoon in history, one that nations feared, presidents mocked, and audiences around the world couldn't stop watching. By the 2000s, The Simpsons had survived presidents, boycotts, and wars. But its next controversy came from somewhere stranger, the internet's collective imagination. The legend of Dead Bart began as a creepypasta post on obscure forums. It claimed Matt Groening had written a lost episode where Bart dies in a plane crash, followed by groaning soundscapes, decaying animation, and the family decomposing in slow motion. The post described Groening at a fan convention, turning pale when asked about it, and secretly slipping a web address to the fan who dared to ask. When they visited the link, they supposedly found the cursed file. The story spread like wildfire. What made Dead Bart believable was how grounded it felt. For decades, Fox really had pulled episodes. Real memos had labeled stories unacceptable. The internet just filled in the blanks, imagining the ultimate forbidden one. The episode too dark even for late-night reruns. Fan videos tried to recreate it, blending real clips with nightmare imagery. YouTubers debated whether Fox had erased tapes, and the Simpsons writers, masters of meta, decided to play along. In 2018, Season 30 premiered with an episode titled Bart's Not Dead. Al Jean confirmed the title was a wink, a playful jab at the myth that wouldn't die. "He's very much alive," Jean said, and lying to his mother. But as digital culture grew darker, the myths grew too. Fans claimed other lost episodes existed. Hidden couch gags, alternate openings, censored endings. The idea wasn't new, but the internet made it immortal. Every time a clip disappeared from streaming due to politics or licensing, the whispers returned, "What are they hiding this time?" Then in 2010, one of those whispers turned real. The street artist Banksy was invited to create a couch gag. What he delivered was industrial horror. Sweatshop workers drew the frames, chained unicorns punched holes in DVDs, and factory fumes filled the air. It was The Simpsons exposing itself, mocking the very system that produced it. Shockingly, Fox aired it almost uncut. The network only asked to remove a few hats and symbols, fearing diplomatic offense. Everything else stayed. Viewers were stunned. For a moment, The Simpsons had turned the camera on itself, becoming the very thing it once mocked, a corporate product confessing its own guilt. The myth of Dead Bart had come full circle. Maybe the scariest part of The Simpsons wasn't the lost episodes or bans. It was that even when it told the truth, it had to disguise it as a joke. 3 decades in, The Simpsons had become something more than television. It was a record of who we'd been and what we were afraid to laugh at. In the early 90s, censorship was about moral panic. By the 2000s, it was global diplomacy. By the 2010s, it was memory itself, deciding which stories deserved to exist. When Fox removed the Michael Jackson episode Stark Raving Dad in 2019, it wasn't because of comedy, but conscience. Jackson's posthumous allegations made the showrunners reconsider what it meant to keep celebrating him. James L. Brooks admitted, "It feels like we're taking a knife to the Mona Lisa, but this is the right decision." That moment divided fans. Some saw it as accountability. Others saw it as betrayal, proof that even The Simpsons could bend to cultural fear. But the truth was more complex. The show had always evolved alongside its audience. When the world changed, so did Springfield. Look at how Homer transformed. Once a symbol of ignorance, later a man wrestling with modernity. Lisa became the moral compass of a cynical age. Even Bart, forever 10, aged emotionally, reflecting generations of kids growing up under shifting rules of what was acceptable. The bans and edits weren't just censorship. They were timestamps. Every cut scene was a record of society's boundaries at that moment. The joke about Tiananmen Square wasn't just removed because it was political. It was removed because the world couldn't handle that kind of honesty anymore. Yet through it all, the show's spirit endured. Groening's team found ways to keep their bite, to sneak satire through pop songs, couch gags, and throwaway lines. When Disney acquired Fox, fans feared The Simpsons would be neutered. Instead, it leaned into self-awareness. The show mocked its own corporate overlords, hinted at censorship from the mouse upstairs, and continued pushing from inside the system. The beauty of The Simpsons was never rebellion for rebellion's sake. It was the ability to adapt, to find humor in constraint, and to reveal the hypocrisy beneath power, even when that power signed their paychecks. The world kept changing. The Simpsons kept mirroring it. And somehow, that reflection, imperfect, absurd, endlessly yellow, still looked like us. Looking back, it's hard to believe a cartoon could cause so much trouble. But The Simpsons wasn't just television. It was rebellion animated frame by frame. George Bush once said he wanted American families to be less like The Simpsons. Ironically, America became exactly like them. Loud, flawed, self-aware, and somehow still functioning. The show predicted not because it was psychic, but because it paid attention. Every scandal, every overreaction, every culture war, it was all material. What makes The Simpsons' legacy so rare is that it never promised virtue. It promised truth, wrapped in absurdity. It mocked politicians and priests, teachers and tycoons, not because it hated them, but because it understood them. The laughter was its way of saying, "We see you." Even when episodes vanished, from Homer's Phobia to Blame It on Lisa to Stark Raving Dad, their echoes remained. Fans remembered every banned line, every censored gag, every rumor of a lost tape. The internet kept what networks couldn't. In that way, censorship failed completely. Today, streaming platforms quietly restore what the airwaves once rejected. The banned Twin Towers episode plays again, unedited. So does the Brazil one, the Australia one, even the China jokes, depending on the region. What was once taboo now sits in algorithmic rotation, a click away. And yet, something has changed. Viewers laugh differently now. We carry history in every joke. When Homer raises a beer, we see decades of satire. When Lisa questions authority, we hear our own doubts. The Simpsons stopped being just entertainment long ago. It became a mirror that grew up with its audience. The most powerful line in the show's history isn't funny at all. It comes from Lisa. "If anyone wants me, I'll be in my room." For millions, The Simpsons was that room. A place to laugh, to question, to see the absurdity of the world, and feel a little less alone in it. The episode Fox tried to bury proved one thing above all: the only real taboo is silence. More than 30 years later, The Simpsons still sits in the same living room, on the same couch, as the world changes around it. It has outlived the presidents who criticized it, the executives who censored it, and the moral panics that tried to tame it. Its true rebellion wasn't in breaking rules. It was in surviving long enough to make those rules irrelevant. When historians look back at late 20th century America, they'll see The Simpsons not as a cartoon, but as a chronicle, a satirical diary of the nation's growing pains. The nuclear family that once represented dysfunction now represents endurance. Through every edit and ban, it remained visible, flawed, alive. Matt Groening once said, "Springfield is every town." That's why every culture that tried to ban it ended up recognizing itself within it. Every government that silenced it only confirmed its power. Every controversy made its humor sharper. The Simpsons taught an entire generation that laughter can be protest, and protest can be funny. That no memo, no censorship note, no government threat can erase the human impulse to point, laugh, and think. So when the couch lights flicker and the familiar theme plays again, it isn't nostalgia, it's survival. A reminder that somewhere between the Waltons and the Simpsons lies the truth about who we really are. Imperfect, contradictory, and still laughing. Because as long as that yellow family keeps sitting down together, no matter what's been banned, erased, or rewritten, the story isn't over. It's still airing, one couch gag at a time.